Because one of the things that's peculiar about the personality and psychopathology research is that there's a tremendous number of positive trait names and identifiers on the empathizing side, on the agreeable side, but there's very little positive about the disagreeable side. And that's a big mistake because it's a normal distribution for a reason. And there's just as many reasons to be disagreeable as there are to be agreeable. The question is, like, and this is a comic trope with regard to engineers because they tend to be somewhat parodied as blunt and disagreeable in their prioritization of systemizing over empathizing. Do you ever watch The Big Bang Theory?
Of course. Yeah.
Yes. Well, so I mean, all of the humor in The Big Bang Theory is systemizing over empathizing.
Yeah.
Pretty much.
And that character, what's the name of the main character in The Big Bang Theory?
The gangly physicist. Is it Stephen? Simon?
No, neither of those. It'll come back to both of us in a second. But some people are wonder whether he's playing the role of an autistic person. Because he's fascinated by science and the world of systems and technology. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But he may not be paying equal attention to other people's feelings in the room. We have this phrase, read the room. Autistic people and maybe, some engineers may be less focused on reading the room because they're focused on understanding the system and making sure it's working. Right now, you and I are surrounded by mechanics and engineers making sure that the cameras are working fine, the sound systems are working fine, and that's their job. That's their talent, and they may be kind of less, focused on are we both comfortable or are we communicating? Are we on the same topic? They're more kind of focusing on the engineering of our interaction or of the situation. But coming back to gender, just because I know that this is again a topic of mutual interest. The reason I say on average gender differences is you can find individuals who are atypical for their gender. When we do those big studies, we've classified the population into people who lean more towards empathy than systemizing, or those who lean more towards systemizing than empathy. So those are two brain types. We call them type E and type S. And then there are people in the middle who are kind of equal in their empathy and their systemizing. We call them type B for balanced. And then there are people at the extremes, people who empathize non-stop, but may find systemizing challenging, and vice versa. People who systemize non-stop and may find empathy challenging. And in that big online study, we had 36,000 autistic people take part. And they tend to be in the type S profile. So leaning more towards systems than empathy, or even in the extreme type S, where there's a bigger discrepancy between their systemizing and their empathy. But back to gender, you can find females. Well, maybe I should kind of back up a little bit. What we find is that more women than men are type E. It's about 40% of women and 20% of men. And more men are type S. Again, it's about 40% of males and 20% of females. But this is already kind of telling you that this isn't about gender. It's about, because you can't prejudge an individual man or a woman just from their gender. It's about the type of brain that they have. And so kind of bringing this into politics, if you like, it would be wrong to prejudge a female applicant in a job. Let's say the job is an engineering job based on her gender. Or if the job was all about communication skills and empathy, maybe you're being interviewed to be a good psychotherapist. Again, it would be wrong to assume that the woman would be the better fit for the therapist job and the man would be the better fit for the engineering job, because it's not about your gender, it's about what kind of brain you have. And, even if we see these on average differences between the genders, and those are interesting, we've been very interested to see whether one of the drivers of those on average gender differences are prenatal hormones like testosterone, which the male fetus produces twice as much testosterone than the female fetus. And that hormone has been demonstrated in animal studies to change brain development. But supposing you're a female fetus exposed to a higher level of testosterone prenatally in the womb, you might end up with a brain that's a bit like Temple Grandin. She engineers systems even though she's chromosomally female.
There were studies done on a cohort of androgenized girls. The studies that I recall were done to look at sexual preference, because the androgenized girls had more male pattern, had a more masculine pattern of play, but it turned out that it had very little effect on their sexual attraction. They were more masculine in their play patterns as juveniles, but it didn't tilt them towards female attraction. I don't know if have the androgenized females been studied in relationship to systemization, or?
So we did a study way back where we looked at a medical condition called congenital adrenal hyperplasia. And so these are girls who, for genetic reasons, are producing more androgens prenatally. And their play is more masculinized in terms of their choice. They tend to choose toys that typical boys would choose, like the Lego and the toy vehicles and so forth. And we gave them a test of autistic traits, actually. So we asked the parents to assess how many autistic traits the girls with CAH, congenital adrenal hyperplasia, have relative to their sisters raised in the same environment who do not have CAH. So one group of girls were hyperandrogenized, and the other group of girls, biologically related, were not. And we found that the girls with CAH had a higher number of autistic traits. And they have been studied for their kind of interest in objects and systems by Melissa Hines, is the person whose work I'm most familiar with. So I don't want our listeners to think that hormones are the only factor, because obviously children are born into a particular world where maybe girls and boys are treated differently by their parents. They're exposed to different messages from the media, from the toy industry. Even teachers may be unconsciously treating boys and girls differently. So social factors may well be feeding into all this, but we were quite interested to see whether prenatal hormones or some aspect of our prenatal biology may also be playing a role.